Hi, Glenn here, Monster Guitars. We're still going through that series where we look at all the tools that you need in building an electric guitar, and today we're going to be looking at the fretwork. Hello again. So the last thing that I did in the previous video was put the frets in. There is more work to do on the frets, but there's really no special order in which you have to do things. And, well, I'd like a break from the frets just for a little while, so I'm going to do something else. Generally, for placing tuner holes, I really do recommend using this tool, which is called a spring divider, because there is a spring in there, and these legs, well, they divide, they move closer together and further apart. And what I've done is I've opened them just to the distance that I need between the holes for these tuning pegs. All you need to do is walk your spring dividers along the line, because each leg has a sharp point on the end, until you have marked the position for 6 holes. I'm about to do the fretwork, and before I begin the fretwork, and I'll go through all the steps of that, so I won't tell you what they are just yet, you want to make sure that your neck is straight, which basically amounts to making sure that the surface of your fretboard is straight, and the way you do that is with another tool, a notched straight edge, because it's a straight edge but it's got notches in it. On this edge, the notches are based on a 24 3/4 inch scale, like a Gibson Les Paul, and on this edge they're based on a 25.5 inch scale, like the guitar that I'm building. You can get or make notched straight edges for guitars with other scale lengths. I've got one for a bass guitar, which I'm planning on making. You sit it on your fretboard, and I shouldn't see any light, because the light is over there. I shouldn't see any light shining in any cracks or gaps between the fretboard and the edge of the straight edge. And in fact I can't, because I've already, using an Allen key, adjusted the truss rod. I won't adjust it further because it's right, and I've made that nice and straight. Yes. So I can go and do my fretwork now. So fretting is when you're going to start using some tools that you wouldn't have for any other reason. So there are some new ones that I'll be introducing here. And the first one is this file. I don't know what's the best way to refer to it. Maybe as a fret end dressing file. You can get smaller ones as well. But the important features of this file is that it has a rounded edge on that side with no teeth on it, and a ground flat edge on that side with no teeth on it. And the beauty of the flat side is that you can have it absolutely flat on the fretboard and move it without too much risk of scratching, although you should still put tape down just in case. And you use it like so, just to take off the very corner, the very sharp corner of the end of the fret that sits on the fretboard, like that. And I'll do that all the way down the fretboard, first on one side, then the other of the fret, that is. You'll notice I'm only hitting the fret twice, which isn't very often. It's just to knock the sharp point off. These are stainless steel frets. If they were ordinary nickel frets, I would only be hitting it once like that. Okay, now the sharp point on the very bottom corner of the fret is gone, but the edge around the bevel on the end is a little bit sharp still. It's a noisy neighborhood. It's the weekend. And here is where the curved edge comes into play. Now you can quite safely roll the fret over that sharp edge, like so. And that's it. Now the end of each fret is quite a nice round shape. The next thing that we need to do is to level the frets, and that's where you make sure that the frets are all at the same height. And so here you'll need a very helpful tool. All these tools are very helpful, aren't they? Making messes. Called a fret rocker, which has these 4 precision straight surfaces. And the purpose of those surfaces is to sit across 3 frets, and if the middle fret is high, it'll rock, and that one is slightly high. You see? And it has different size, different length edges, because of course the frets are closer together up here, so you need a shorter surface, and there's no rocking there. So my first port of call, if a fret is high, is just to bang it in a little bit more with the hammer. And then if it's still going to be too high, I'll just put a mark on it with a marker pen and then move on, and then we'll see how many high frets we've got in the end. And there's less of a rock. And now it's not rocking at all. Right, so there was just a little bit more movement downwards to be had by pushing it in. Well, this didn't go quite as expected, in a good way actually, because now there are some tools that I was going to demonstrate that I don't need to demonstrate, but I'll explain them anyway. You see, it's expected that when you hammer your frets in, less so when you press them in, but even then, that they won't be level, that some will be slightly higher than others, and so you'll need to level your frets. And so you do what I was doing earlier. You go along with your fret rocker, and you see if the rocker rocks on one of the frets, indicating that it's higher than the ones on either side. And what you would normally do is you would make a note. You'd mark that fret that's high with a Sharpie marker or something like that, so you would know where they were. And then you would do what's called fret leveling. And to do fret leveling, well, the first time I ever did fret leveling, I used this file, which was sold as a fret leveling file, and that works. You run the file along the frets, and you just take the tops off the high ones. If there's, say, only 2 or 3 high frets on the fretboard, you could just take a smaller file like this and focus on those individual files rather than sanding across all of them, and check again with the fret rocker once you're done. What I use these days, and what I think most people probably use to level their frets, is what's called a fret leveling beam, which is just a precision-made straight hollow tube. Well, you can get them in different shapes, but this one's a hollow rectangular tube, and you stick some sandpaper on one of the flat surfaces, very fine sandpaper, and you would use double-sided stick tape to do that. And you might use, say, 400 grit sandpaper. It depends on how aggressive you're going to have to be, and sand, thus leveling the tops of the frets. It just happens that by hammering in the frets when one of them was high on the occasional fret, I've managed to get my frets level, which I haven't done before. In other words, without even leveling them, I have no high spots. I've gone up the whole fretboard, and they're really level, which is great. so I don't get to demonstrate leveling. Once you've leveled your frets, what happens then is you've got frets that have got a slightly flat top, and you need to engage in a process called fret crowning. And there are a few different tools you can use for crowning. You can get special fret crowning files, but what I've settled on doing, and again this is I think probably the norm, is using this triangular file where each edge is ground smooth and round, so that when you do that, for example, provided you're careful, you're not going to scratch your fretboard. It's still taped up though. And what you would then do, once your frets are all leveled, I'm using what's called a fretboard protector. You can get by without one if you've got a file like this, but this gives you an extra level of protection. And you would use that just to restore that rounded crown on top of your frets, because you've misshapen them by leveling them. I don't need to do that, but these are tools you need. These are definitely tools you need. Fret dressing file, which is what I'm choosing to call that. Fret crowning file, the triangular one I really do think is the best one to use. Your fret rocker, which is what you would use first in the leveling process, and then of course your fret leveling beam or a file. The file leaves more visible scratches in your frets, whereas the sandpaper is a lot finer, so I recommend using that. There we are. That is most of the fretting process. Now I'm just going to tidy them up even more. After you've crowned your frets, which I didn't do, but suppose you did, like I would on most occasions, you'll need to polish them, because crowning them with a file is still going to leave some scratches on them. In fact, it's definitely going to leave some scratches on them. I don't use any tools for this. I just use some very fine sandpaper. I've got here some 600 grit. What you would use, I guess, depends on how visible the scratches are on the crowns of your frets that you've just filed. The idea is you take a piece of sandpaper that is rough enough to remove those scratches and leave slightly finer scratches, and then you take a finer piece of sandpaper that will remove those scratches and leave slightly finer scratches, and so on until you can't see any scratches at all. Up to you how finely you go. You don't have to get frets that look like mirrors. You could just have something that has a kind of satin finish to it. That's perfectly good when it comes to simple playability. It's a matter of aesthetics, I guess. I've got some 600 grit here. Because there weren't any visible scratches, just a little bit of dullness, I suppose. This is really doing a good job on the frets. You can see them gleaming. So this is all that I'll use in terms of sandpaper. So like I said, completely up to you how shiny you want to make your frets. I've decided to make these ones quite shiny. So after the sandpaper, I'm taking some steel wool. Well, actually it's synthetic steel wool. 000 synthetic steel wool, and just giving them a further polish up. And this is not even the last step that I'm going to use. I'm going to get my highest level of shine onto these frets by using some metal polish. This is a product by Autosol. I guess the idea is that it's meant for polishing metal automotive parts, but you can use it on any metal you like. And to apply it, I'm just going to use the humble paper towel. That's quite a bit on there, given how small frets are, so that should hopefully do a few frets. In fact, I will share it around between frets before I start rubbing it in. Making a mess. It's alright. A polish is essentially just a very fine abrasive. And you can see it's taking off, I don't really know what it's taking off, I guess lots of little particles that have come off as a result of me using that steel wool, or maybe just some dust off the fretboard, although I can see most of the muck is coming off the frets themselves, so it's cleaning them. Okay, I have finished the fretwork. So we're done with the fretwork. We are done with the fretwork. Next time, I think we're going to be making some more substantial changes, like removing portions of wood from both the neck and the body as this thing hurtles towards completion. So join me then.